What's going on, everybody? This is Chithon Alliance here, bringing you the random video. Today we're going to be discussing the ban list coming out sometime soon, I guess. I can't really exactly say when. They said no sooner than April, and we might as well just take their word on it that it's going to be sometime this month, if not next month. But I really, honestly, at this current point in time, I don't think there's very much that there should be any changes to as far as the ban list is concerned, but there are cards that we could probably change and ultimately fix so that the game can be a little bit more balanced and a little bit more healthier. And I have quite a few cards here, but mainly I want to just cast a wide net, simply because if it casts a wide net, there's more likely of a chance that cards will this list will see some validity in some way, shape, or form, so to speak. I'm also going to be talking about cards that I haven't chosen for this list, simply because I don't feel like there are going to be issues as far as the decks are concerned. So let's just jump right into it. So I only have 2 cards that should be banned here. The first card here is Soul Charge. Actually, no, I have 5 cards that are banned here, because there's 3 fusions that I want banned. But the first card that I want banned is Soul Charge. The reason why I want Soul Charge to be banned is very much the same way as a lot of other cards. It's a 1-card blowout card. It's super nutty. This card is kind of on the verge of better than Monster Reborn, because it revives 5 monsters instead of 1. Granted, there's a lot of downside to it. You can't conduct your battle phase and you burn yourself for it, but that realistically isn't that big of a deal. Maximum I've seen players go for 3 monsters and they still manage to win games after that. The card is super insane, plus the fact that it can be easily manipulated in a lot of decks to abuse the Pendulum mechanic, or not the Pendulum mechanic, the Link mechanic, as well as other mechanics such as the Seed and Synchro mechanic. It really does bring this card into fruition as to why this card should be at 0. Plus, this card is overall, in general, just poorly designed. Having a card that basically lets you grab anything that you want out of your graveyard and then grab more cards out of your graveyard is super good, and is super dumb in this case. The reason why Monster Reborn, in my opinion, is not quote unquote broken is because it only grabs 1 monster. And sure, you can grab a monster out of both players' graveyards, but generally speaking, if you're playing against a deck that's like, for example, say you're against Pendulum Magicians, there's not going to be very many targets for you in the graveyard as far as that is concerned. And also, if you're playing against somebody else, their cards are probably going to be worse in your deck than it's going to be in theirs. So if you just activate Monster Reborn and you take a card out of your opponent's graveyard, then chances are it's not going to be as strong as if it were like something else. Monster Reborn can grab powerhouse cards, but for the most part, those powerhouse cards generally are worth it. For example, if you're playing this again, like if you're playing Monster Reborn against your Dracos, and you take their masterpiece, sure, they don't have the masterpiece anymore, but that masterpiece is just a vanilla monster. It doesn't do anything. It's easy to play. It's easy to play around. You can't kill it. It's you can just easily kill it. You don't even have to kaiju it. You could just like pop it with anything. So I honestly think that Soul Charge in this case is different, because having the access to summon 3 cards and then make your plays extraordinarily stupid is really unhealthy for the game in general. So I think this card should be banned. Ignace Heat should be banned. The reason why I originally had a different opinion on this, because I think that if we didn't have the announcement for the Mega 10s like we did, I think Ignace Heat probably would have stayed at 1. The reason I think that it should be banned is because if they're going to promote True Dracos this much in the Mega 10s by promoting Draco, and we're going to assume that Masterpiece is going to be in there at some point, then Ignace is probably the likely candidate to see a hit on the ban list, simply because it doesn't by itself hurt the deck. If it goes to 0, you still have Majesty's Maiden, you still have Draco Cavalry, though he's not very good, and you still play Amano Awato, which we'll talk about in a second, but for the most part, Ignace Heat will be a likely candidate to be a ban on the list. I really don't want to see it happen, but this is something that I think is going to be very feasible, and it's going to be I'm foreshadowing it, definitely. Next is the fusions that I want banned. The first fusion that I want banned is Independent Nightingale. I am strictly against cards that are by design that inherently promote degenerate combos and FTKs, and this card is no different. I actually forgot a card on here, but we'll discuss it later. I think Independent Nightingale, we don't need to keep bad archetypes alive because and ban a bunch of cards when we could just ban this card and just deal with the problem outright and just not have those FTKs around. It sucks for those Lyrilisk players, but for the sake of the cause, there's a lot of fairly stupid degenerate FTKs that are in the meta and have been in the meta that have been keeping that will inherently by itself in the future put cards on the ban list because of this card. And it's impossible for Konami to look at every single card interaction in the entire game and say, okay, this is going to be degenerate, so we probably shouldn't make it. But I think that if they banned a card that is designed to be degenerate like this, where it was played in 2 FTKs, one we didn't get to see, but 2 FTKs, then it should be a signal that we should probably take action against the card that is responsible for the FTK. And I think this card is exactly responsible for the FTK. And the next card that I also want to talk about is kind of in the same light, is Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom. It's very much in the same way, except I think this card is less of a culprit because it's not Starving Venom that is responsible, but it does create degenerate FTKs by itself because it just requires 2 Dark Pendulum monsters, which is really easy to do. You don't have to fusion summon it, you just make it. It's like a Synchro monster or an Xyz monster. You just simply plop it on the board if you have 2 Dark Pendulum monsters. This card is different from Lyrical Cynic because Nightingale doesn't constrain card design as much as this card would, because this card would constrain the entire Pendulum archetype mechanic into if we make this card, will it be too broken for Starving Venom? And that's what we have to look at here, is cards that are Dark Pendulum monsters. It constrains Dark Pendulum monsters to where, well, now we have to be careful of what cards to make in this deck, or for this particular archetype of this type of card. So I think we just ban this card, that way we don't have to worry about card constraints. That's why cards like Royal Magical Library I've been so outspoken against, is because of the fact that it limits card design, and that card also keeps cards on the ban list. Both of these cards do kind of the same thing, they're just different in different entities. But I feel like both of these cards are inherent problems with the game currently, because any cards that promote degenerate FTKs and have the potential to do that in the future should probably not see play on the ban list, or should probably not see play in the game. That's why we see cards like Magical Explosion never seeing the light of day, going to 1. That's why we have Self-Destruct button, or at 0, and we have Final Countdown at 0, and we have Chain Strike at 2, because those cards by themselves promote degenerate card combos. They promote degenerate FTKs, and they promote degenerate card decks, and they constrain card design. So I think for the most part, these cards should definitely just go away. And the last card that I think that should be banned is Gemini Seraph Knight. This kind of falls in with, I'm actually going to lump Lady Lapis into this, because I think Lady Lapis is probably a card that probably should exist on this list, but I just kind of forgot about it. It was kind of a last second thing. But Seraph Knight is one of those cards that by nature is going to be relevant throughout the history of the game. It doesn't matter what you do to this card. It's one of those cards that's very immune to power creep. It's very comparable, in my opinion, to Norden. Norden is another card that's very immune to power creep. You will not be able to power creep Norden out of the game. Same thing goes for Seraph Knight. There will always be a need for the extra normal summon this card provides. And even if the body itself would just be enough to make this card really good, but the fact that this card grants you additional benefits upon summoning this card. It extends your Link summoning plays, it extends your Xyz and your Synchro plays, and the fact that this card is going to be rather unhealthy. The card is rather unhealthy for the game because of the fact that it's relatively easy to maneuver around. Sure, you have to play Brilliant Fusion and you have to play Gemini Garnet, and Garnet is the reason why people are probably like, no, this card probably is fine, but I think like as long as Geminites are a feasible thing, this card is going to be one on my radar for probably a long time. The reason why I don't say we should ban Brilliant Fusion is because of the fact that it's actually played in an archetype. Now, this might sound hypocritical going back to my previous statement that we shouldn't keep bad archetypes alive because for one card, because even if it promotes a generic thing, but Strive doesn't promote anything degenerate as far as I'm concerned. And two, you don't necessarily need this card in your in Gem Knights. You do need Brilliant Fusion in Gem Knights for Gem Knights to even make any sort of playable method. You have to play Brilliant Fusion and your Gem Knight fusions and stuff like that. So it's essential for Seraph Knight. Lady Lapis, like I said, should probably exist on this list somewhere. The reason why like I said, it's the last minute thing. I didn't really think about her, though she probably does deserve to be somewhere on this list. Maybe at 1, I wouldn't say ban, because she's still playable in the archetype as a 1-of, and just having 1 is probably fine. Next, we're going to talk about cards that should be at 1. I wanted to keep this list as small as possible. Same thing goes for the cards that should go to 2, but there's actually quite a number of cards that should probably go from 1 to 2, not from 3 to 2. So let's just go right into it. So the first card that we have here is Astrograph Sorcerer. The reason why I think Astrograph Sorcerer should probably be limited is for obvious reasons. This card is super good. This card replenishes itself. This card has stupid interactions with Electromite, and it makes the Pendulum archetype, Pendulum Edition archetype, extremely good. The problem, though, I have with this card is the fact that you can play it in different archetypes, and that by itself might actually ward people off away from this card being seen as a problem card, but it definitely is a problem card simply because it searches pretty much any card in the game that you can physically think of. And this card also has some degenerate combos with your opponent as well. If your opponent destroys something for purple, like let's say your opponent destroys Purple Poison Magician and Astrograph gets summoned afterwards, you get to search your opponent's Purple Poison Magician because your opponent destroyed it. It doesn't limit itself like a lot of other cards do. It interacts with your opponent's cards as well, and it interacts with your with other cards that are unhealthy for the game. Plus, it takes another bit of versatility away from Pendulum Magicians, where they're not capable of running or making 3 negates. They're able to make maybe 2. So I think having this card at 1 is probably fine. I didn't limit cards like Chronograph or anything like that because I don't think they're really that much of a problem. Though if they become 1, they could potentially end up on the list. I could see Purple Poison at some point making its way on the list at maybe, but we'll see. I didn't want to put it too much because I made this list for the intention of mine to not kill decks. Despite Lyrical Lucinia, I honestly don't think you probably need Lucinia or Nightingale in your deck, but I don't want to kill really good archetypes that could potentially stand up to Brandish Maiden. So I mean, and Lyrical Lucinia cannot do that. So next is Fairytale Snow. Fairytale Snow is one of those cards that is really crazy. It's kind of stupid how this card works. I don't like this card in the game. I honestly think it should be banned, but I'm putting it at 1 simply because I don't think it's ban worthy at the current point in time. I think Book of Moon is a totally fine card. It's spot removal but it's a -1. This card is never a -1. This card is always going to be better than what you can make with it. It's also not a hard once per turn, and the fact that this card recurs itself, unlike Book of Moon, where it just you target a monster and it's done, and you get the free card. It's pretty stupid. Additionally, the Book of Moon effect is completely optional. You can just straight up just summon this card if you want to by just banishing 7 cards. Now banishing 7 cards might sound like a lot of cards, but in terms of in the grand scheme of things, it really is not that many. Unless in 60 card decks, especially if their sole focus is this card can literally outgrind any other deck in the game. You think of a grind deck that just goes through a lot of resources and can play the game through multiple turns. This card can outgrind that deck. And the fact that this card is also a really strong body as well makes it really, really powerful. And I think this card should definitely be at 1 for that reason. And it's really kind of just overall unhealthy for the game because that limits interactions from your opponent, and it just creates some of these degenerate combos. True Draco Heritage. This is another card that I think they're going to go with if they're going to limit, if they're going to hit True Draco. The reason why I think this is the case is because Heritage by itself is an extremely powerful card. It's very comparable to True King Returns in a lot of ways. True King Return basically does what this card does in a lot of ways. Doesn't draw cards, granted, but the fact that this card can draw 3 cards and still act upon your opponent in such a oppressive force by making Masterpiece is kind of overbearing. And like I said, the deck will still be playable if we just keep Masterpiece at 3, if they're going to promote them and promote True Draco in the tins. But I think they have to deal with this deck at some point. And I think dealing with this deck to where it's now not immune to power creep is really good. And I think banning Ignace and banning Heritage will make this deck less formidable against power creep. So the reason, and I'll go on this later, I have 3 cards that I'm going to talk about that are really on a really hot topic debate here right at the moment, but let's just keep on going. Terraforming. I've been outspoken against Terraforming for quite some time. Terraforming probably needs to go at 1. I know that there's not very many broken field spells being printed in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, but that's the thing. That's because Terraforming exists. People don't understand that when Terraforming if Terraforming didn't exist, the field spells probably would be fine. But for the most part, since we have this card that says, hey, search out a field spell, it limits card design. This card inherently limits card design. Set rotation does not limit card design in the fact that it's not like Terraforming. I think set rotation basically asks you to say, hey, you have to have 2 cards, you have to have 2 different field spells, or else I'm not going to work. Additionally, Metaverse is a trap card, and trap cards are traditionally really slow, and it's not powerful enough for it to make that big of an impact. Now, granted, in Metaverse's defense, you can play it on your turn, but that implies you have to wait 2 whole rounds before you're able to even activate Metaverse to get your free advantage from it. Metaverse has its own restrictions, and so does set rotation. But Terraforming does not have its own restrictions other than the fact that you have to have a field spell to even activate the card. And I can see why people would say that's the reason why Terraforming probably shouldn't be at 1. But for the most part, the reason why that we don't have any more, that we don't really see that many broken field spells anymore, is because Terraforming is so prominent. The last, I think, most broken field spell that we've had in quite some time is Dragonic Diagram. And Dragonic Diagram is not nearly as much of a problem than Terraforming is. Because unlike Terraforming, Dragonic Diagram is not played in every single deck. It's not played in every single deck that plays field spells. And Dragonic Diagram is realistically only viable in 2 different archetypes. This one's viable in a plethora of archetypes. And more importantly, it's very comparable to cards like Upstart Goblin and Reinforcement of the Army. If Reinforcement of the Army was at 3, you would definitely play Reinforcement of the Army at 3 in every single warrior deck that you can think of. If Upstart Goblin was at 3, it would be a far cry shame to play Upstart at less than 3. It's a far cry shame to not even play it at all at the current point in time. That's how powerful Upstart Goblin is. And this card is very comparable to those 2 cards because they essentially will act as blank cards in your deck. I made false comparisons to saying that Reinforcement is not like Upstart, but that's wrong because these 3 cards are synonymous with each other. They are the same cards essentially. They're just Reinforcements of the Army and Terraforming are just more confined to a specific space. Whereas and I think in some ways both Terraforming and Reinforcement of the Army are better because they search through your deck and you actually get to see where your cards are at. Unlike Upstart, where you just drag a link card at the top of the deck. But I'm getting on a tangent here. Terraforming should be at 1 because of the fact that it limits card design, and it's like Upstart and Reinforcement of the Army, which are both cards that are at 1 and should probably still be at 1, should stay at 1. Trickster Reincarnation. This is the last card that I think that should be at 1. The reason because is getting the Droll Reincarnation lock is kind of super degenerate. It's so cringy. I don't like the fact that it says, hey, you can't. I win the game based on opening 2 reincarnations. Now, granted, you have to open 2 reincarnations, but this card by itself is super powerful. You have to understand that this card is not. It's kind of realistically unfair, because it banishes your opponent's starting hand, and cards that banish entire sets of hands or cards that send entire hands to the graveyard are currently at 0. Card destruction, morphing jar are both at 0, and if we had either of those cards, those cards would be super dumb in the current game of Yu-Gi-Oh. And this card is confined to a specific archetype, because it's played in a specific archetype. I mean, come on. I mean, I really don't have to make that many more points against this card. I think for the most part, this card should probably definitely go to 1, because of the fact that cards that came before it, like Card Destruction and Morphing Jar, are at 0. Ash Balsam. This card should go to 2. Realistically, I really don't want it to go to 2, but if patterns are like they are, then this card will probably definitely go to 2. It's played in every single deck in the side deck, if not through main decking it, and even if they don't play it, it's still very formidable against them. The only deck that it doesn't really hurt is Pendulum Magicians. Unless they're playing the FTK version, then this card totally wrecks that deck. But it's very. I mean, the reason why Mistake isn't seeing play, or Mistaken Arrest, or Share Ride isn't seeing play, is because both of those cards are incredibly slow. They are essentially trap cards, whereas this card can be played at any time. So that's my argument for that. But I really don't want it to go to 3, but it's like logical patterns. Like they will repeat themselves. Card Demise. Card Demise is probably again on Konami's radar for True Draco. This will make the deck a little bit less consistent. It won't make him that much less consistent, let's be fair. But it's there. It exists. So, it's probably going to follow the same trends of the OCG if they do go that route. So, and we're going to move on to the cards that should go to 2. There are that should go from 1 to 2, not 0 down 3 to 2. Power Cliff Towers and Cleaver Scout, I don't think it'll make that much of a difference. If we can have Masterpiece at 3, which is a much more threatening card, then we should probably have Towers at 3, or Towers at 2, and possibly 3. I think Cleaver Scout should be at 3, because that deck, I think, is at full power in the OCG, and it isn't doing anything. So I think this is totally fine. It will probably inspire some people to get some top 8s with this, but overall I think it'll just fade away as like Brandished Maiden and something else takes over. So, Terratop. This is a little controversial, but I kind of want to hear me out. I kind of want you guys to hear me out on this, because this card is very comparable to running Garnets in your deck, and this card isn't nearly as oppressive and doesn't really promote any FTKs. This card by itself is fine, and I think 2 doesn't make it that strong either. So I think this card's like a 3 of or bust, and if it's not at 3, then it doesn't matter. So Necro's Brainiac. I didn't put Shred on here because I don't know. Shred probably should be on the list at 1. But the reason why I put Brainiac to 2 is because if we're gonna put Shred to 1, we might as well just put Brainiac to 2. We can keep Unicorn at 1. I think probably that's probably fair. I mean, this card at 1 is a little too slow, because this card's essential. It's a search card. I mean, it's kind of like Stratos in a lot of ways for the deck. So I think this card should be at 2. Book of Moon should probably be at 2, because it's just, I mean, cards that are immune to targeting are just gonna laugh at this card. So, Convulse, same kind of deal with Book of Moon realistically. Though this card's, I think, is a little bit more dangerous, slightly, but I think it'll be kind of cool to see it go to 2. It'd be really fun to have it at 2, because we have a lot of generic traps that are way more powerful than this card, like Torrential Tribute. and that card's at 3, so this card should definitely be at 3. We also have Bottomless Vegetable, Draco, and neither of those cards are seeing any amount of play. So, next cards, this is kind of the controversial thing. I kind of want to see Solemn Judgment and Solemn Warning go to 2. I want like a whole like meta where it's just nothing but stun decks, because that would be kind of funny. Just watching people just grind and actually think about their plays for a change, instead of just going, haha, I'm gonna like FTK you and lock down your board so you can't play the game. Go. This card, both of these cards promote healthy interactions with your opponent. It allows your opponent to, it forces your opponent to think and work around these cards and say, how am I supposed to play through these cards? So it would be kind of cool. And the cards that should be at 3. There are not really that many reasons why they should be on the list at all, but I think they should be at 3. The first card is Luster Pendulum. Doesn't do anything at the current time. It's not doing anything. At 3 it'll be fine. Hawaiian Magician, it's fine. I think it'll be fine. Mathematician, this card's going to do nothing. Tyrant Neptune, if we ban Nightingale, this card can come back to 3 because this card doesn't promote degenerate FTKs, and it hasn't been forever. This card is not good outside of that FTK. It's not doing anything outside of that FTK. So, Tribe Infected Verse, because this card sucks. It honestly sucks. It really doesn't need to be at 3, or it doesn't really need to be at 0. So it's just kind of stupid. Zen Mady, I kind of misplayed. I should have said this card is Zen Mady at 1. I don't want this card at 3 just yet, but 1 should be fine to test the waters. We got the new Ling Monster, and we've had some support taper in over the years. So I think just to promote that stuff, this card should probably be at 3 or just at 1, maybe 3, but who knows? And I'd probably bring it to be at 3 because this card is really bad in late formats. So. Yeah. On to the cards that I wanted to talk about that I didn't choose. There's actually only 2, but they I put through the third one here as a kind of a placeholder as an example. Why didn't I put Amano Auto at 0? Because it is not the problem. Outside of True Draco, what does this card do? Absolutely nothing. It's sure there could be the potential to deck that in the future this card should be at 0, based on that. But at the current time, you have to have cards that grant you extra normal summons. And True Draco, I believe, is the only current deck to date that does that at the moment. Aside from like Monarchs, but I didn't put any Monarch cards on here for that reason, because Monarchs is still really too powerful for this card, I think. But Amano Auto isn't the problem because 1, the first thing, it can't be special summon. That's the first check. 2, it negates your own stuff too. So that's the third check. 3, it goes back to your hand. But if your opponent like kills it before that, or if they like Solemn Warning it, or if they Bottomless Grapple, it's pretty dead. And your opponent can find a way this card can easily be baited out with Infinite Transients. Because you activate this card, it's a card's a bounce effect, and your opponent can just Infinite Transient, and it'll lock it into the board, and they can just go, oh hey, normal summon a monster, swing into it, and kill it. So it checks itself, and it also wrecks itself in some ways too. Masterpiece, because I believe that if you follow the same logic and you think that Tower should be at 3, you think you should probably hold the same line for Masterpiece, and they're not really too far off from each other. That being said, I think this card probably will go at some point, but I think at the current time it just loses to a lot of things. If we ban Ignace and we limit Heritage, the deck is not as powerful as it once was. Plus, it also would lose Terraforming and Card of Demise. It would lose 1 copy of Card of Demise and 2 Terraforming, and so it would force the True Draco player to play some like True Draco Cavalry or Maximize on Majesty Maidens, and those cards are very suboptimal compared to Ignace or Dynamite Knight. Masterpiece by nature is fine because I think this deck Masterpiece is fine because I think every deck should have their boss monster intact, and that's why I was kind of against Towers when it got banned. I was against it being banned because it's a boss monster. It's iconic for the deck to run Masterpiece. It's iconic for Cleaforce to run Towers. So it's iconic for Monarchs to run Erebus and Ether and stuff like that. So also, argument against Amano Awado is that if people are willing to play Amano Awado and this card gets hit, they'll just play Inspector Border, which arguably is kind of that's the same thing. If your opponent does set up a board though, then they can play around this card. But this card is a 2000 body, and your opponent is not just going to let you set up on them with this card on the field. If they're playing this card and they're playing over Amano Awado, they're probably playing a lot of stun cards already. And there is Amano Awado, or there is Inspector Border versions of True Draco that do play a bunch of stun cards. So anyway, guys, if you guys did enjoy this video, please leave a comment in the comment section down below. Tell me what you guys think should be on the ban list. Tell me what you think of my predictions, and tell me what you guys would change on my list if you would want to change my list at all. I hope to see you guys in the next video. This has been Ignace signing out.